pleasure to be here today. Let me give you a little bit. Let me give you a little bit more detail on my pathway to being here, talking about nutrition. What is an oncologist talking to you about nutrition? So, during my training, as mentioned, to become an oncologist, suddenly AIDS came out of the blue, and we didn't know what it was or what to do about it. So I became a champion of alternative therapies, even when there was no conventional therapy to be alternative to. And then when we got conventional therapy, I said, oh, this isn't very good. It was something called AZT. Some of you might remember that. So I wound up writing all the chapters in all the AIDS textbooks on complementary and alternative therapies. And then in 1992, somebody challenged me to study marijuana as a treatment for AIDS wasting syndrome. And I said, okay, I can do that. I went to college in the 60s. So I fought the government and ultimately won and got $1 million and 1,400 of the government's finest cigarettes to do research, which gave me a strong appreciation, as mentioned, of the power of plants as medicine, which then took me to the Telluride Mushroom Festival in Telluride, Colorado, a month after I had done my first ever jury duty and came home and said, I want to go to law school. But in Telluride, I met Andrew Weil, the guy with the white beard, looks like Santa Claus, and he described a 2-year online distance learning fellowship you could do with his program at the University of Arizona. So I said, I don't want to go to law school, I want to do that. So I did, and it changed my life. When I finished, I said, I'm done with HIV/AIDS, it's very different, I've been doing it for 25 years. What I want to do now is integrative oncology, working with people living with and beyond cancer and helping them to integrate these other modalities into their conventional care. Can't really do that at Zuckerberg, San Francisco General. We changed the name, because of a large gift, where I'm chief of oncology, because as I often say, for most of my patients there, cancer is often the least of their problems. They're homeless, they're addicted, they're psychotic, or they're undocumented, so I can't talk to them about eating organic or doing yoga because they have much more basic needs. So I went to our Osher Center for Integrative Medicine and started my practice there in integrative oncology, where instead of treating cancer at the Osher Center, I treat people living with cancer. I tell them cancer is like a weed, and someone else is taking care of your weed, and it's my job to work with the garden and make your soil as inhospitable as possible to growth and spread of the weed. And I do that by looking to see what it is they eat. Because I believe that nutrition is really quite important in caring for people living with and beyond cancer. So this slide came from the Journal of the American Medical Association, and it was from an article entitled The State of U.S. Health, 1990 to 2010. And it shows the main causes of both mortality and morbidity in the United States today. And the top line says dietary risks. Dietary risks has now surpassed tobacco as the #1 cause of both mortality and morbidity in the United States. And that doesn't include high body mass index, otherwise known as obesity, or physical inactivity and low physical activity, which are the 4th and 5th bars. So if you put all of those three together, those lifestyle issues, food, overweight, and physical activity, are hugely surpassing tobacco use and high blood pressure as major causes of morbidity and mortality in the United States today. So what does that mean, dietary risks? I was quite curious, and it was not mentioned further in this article, but it did give you a reference to look at in Lancet, an article that had appeared 2 years earlier, and it defines the 5 components of dietary risks. So that would be diets that are low in fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts and seeds, milk, fiber, calcium, seafood, omega-3 fatty acids, and polyunsaturated fatty acids, and diets that are high in red meat, processed meat, sugar-sweetened beverages, trans fatty acids, and sodium. So those are the 14 components of dietary risk, and I ate lunch here, and I can tell you that there are good options, and you could be in the green column, right? So what I do with my patients is really talk to them about these guidelines from both the American Cancer Society and an organization called the American Institute for Cancer Research, World Cancer Research Fund. Every 5 years, the American Cancer Society publishes an article, and every 10 years, the American Institute for Cancer Research publishes a 700-page volume on food, nutrition, physical activity, and the prevention of cancer. And that's really what I use in my discussion, are the guidelines. The number 10 guideline says for cancer survivors, follow the 9 guidelines above. So the first guideline says, be as lean as possible without becoming underweight. So again, body mass index is a big issue. And in this country today, we have sort of mainstreamed obesity. We expect to see people needing very big wheelchairs at the airport. And I think it's, the major cause of the increased cost of healthcare in this country is the huge amount of people who are overweight or obese. This shows obesity, which is a body mass index greater than 30. Body mass index is a calculation from height and weight. People who have a body mass index between 25 and 30 are overweight. At this point in the United States, 2/3 of the adults are overweight. 1/3 is overweight and 1/3 is obese. So 2/3 of the country are above the normal weight. And you can see this is not the election map. It's pretty close though, isn't it? I'm not going to say anything else, but you can see where the obesity lies. Yeah, that's very interesting. So the estimated 72 million adults are now obese in the United States, and the increased cost of healthcare annually is about $1,500 for those people who are overweight or obese. Interestingly, the national goal is to have for each state less than 15% of obese people, and no state has less than 15%. The last state to have less than 20% of their people obese, does anybody know?
Oregon.
Which one? Colorado was the last state. They have now joined the rest of the country. Now this is pretty weird, isn't it? That the American Medical Association, the date there is 2013. That's when obesity was called a disease. I'm still attending on the medical service at San Francisco General Hospital, and my intern or medical student presents a patient to me before we go in the room. The patient has diabetes, hypertension, coronary artery disease, osteoarthritis, sleep apnea, and hyperlipidemia. And then I walk in the room and I see somebody who weighs 300 pounds, and I say, why did you leave out their number 1 medical problem? It's because nobody was taught that obesity is a medical problem or a medical diagnosis. And even in cancer, we're now becoming aware that obesity is a significant role player. The American Institute for Cancer Research estimates that obesity-related excesses of those 7 cancers account for 115,000 preventable deaths in the United States each year. Now, the number 1 up there, as far as the total number of cases, is breast cancer. About 20% of breast cancer is related to being obese or overweight. And these are generally estrogen receptor positive cancers in postmenopausal women. But because there's so much breast cancer, the N, 33,000, is the largest. If you look further down, endometrial or uterine cancer, 50% of uterine cancer is related to being overweight or obese. And then the rest of them are gastrointestinal malignancies, although kidney cancer, surprisingly, about 1/4 of the cases of kidney cancer, for some reason, are also related to being overweight or obese. Well, how does that work? Why would fat increase the risk of cancer? Well, body fat secretes chemicals that promote inflammation. Inflammation. So what is that? When you cut yourself or when you have surgery, when you heal, it gets red, hot, tender, and swollen. That's inflammation. It's part of normal healing. But when that goes on inside of us without provocation, it leads to degenerative diseases, such as dementia, heart disease, and cancer. And we really do appreciate that a lot of cancer is related to ongoing inflammation. And inflammation sort of bypasses the immune system, so instead of doing its job and normally eating up little cancer cells that we develop on a daily basis, the immune system is too busy fighting inflammation, and so it impairs our immunity. Particularly for the estrogen-driven malignancies, the breast cancers and the uterine cancers, fat actually makes estrogen. So women who have estrogen-positive breast cancer who are overweight are doing really themselves a disservice because that fat is making estrogen, which is continuing to drive their cancer. What I think is probably the most important and the most interesting is that too much body fat triggers what we call insulin resistance. So your cells become resistant to the effect of insulin, which is to drive sugar into the cells. And this raises the level of insulins and the so-called insulin-like growth factor, both of which promote inflammation. And that growth factor is also a growth factor for cancer cells. So there are many reasons that obesity should be avoided. The second guideline, actually, I don't have up here, but it says, be physically active for 30 minutes each day. And you know, there was a poll done in the year 2000 in Newsweek that asked adult Americans, senior citizens, what the hardest thing was for them to do. And more people stated that being physically active on a regular basis was the hardest thing to do than people who said quitting tobacco was the hardest thing to do. So being physically active does take motivation, takes the ability, and it takes the facilities. But even walking for 30 minutes each day is very important. The third guideline was changed in 2007. The version that came out in 1997 said limit consumption of energy-dense foods. But in 2007, they flipped it and put avoid sugary drinks on top. And I was at the meeting in Bethesda when they unveiled that guideline. And I went to the microphone and I said, there are sugary drinks and there are sugary drinks. You could drink a carbonated cola beverage, God forbid, or a fruit punch, which is probably glucose and high fructose corn syrup, or you can squeeze 3 oranges in the morning. And the response from the podium was, energetically, they're all the same. So I had lunch with Robert Lustig, who's our pediatric endocrinologist at UCSF, who's fighting the war on sugar. And he says, if you eat an orange, the fiber slows down the absorption of sugar into the bloodstream. But if you squeeze the sugar away from the fiber, it's like drinking a Coca-Cola. So why is that bad? When the body sees that sugar, it responds with insulin and insulin-like growth factor, both of which promote inflammation and cause cancer cells to divide. So does it mean I don't squeeze my 3 oranges? I used to do it every morning. Now I just do it twice a week. I did it yesterday, and I'm still here to tell you about it. But sugar is the #1 no, interestingly. And even National Geographic had it on the cover. And this is an old slide because it only goes to 2008. And if you know anything about high fructose corn syrup, that's about the year that people started to get nervous about whether there was a health risk with high fructose corn syrup. So you can see the green line and the blue line starting to diverge at the end of that curve. I think if we looked at it in 2016, we'd probably see an increase in the blue line, the refined sugar, and a decrease in high fructose corn syrup because it's been removed from so many foods. But the bottom line is that the average American still consumes about 100 pounds of sugar each year. How could we consume that much sugar? I have to read you this because Many of you probably might remember this sort of an advertisement. It came out, on the bottom it says it's from the Soda Pop Board of America, Chicago, Illinois, without a zip code. So that means it's before 1962, because that's when zip codes started. But it says, for a better start in life, start cola earlier. How soon is too soon? Not soon enough. Laboratory tests over the last few years have proven that babies who start drinking soda during that early formative period have a much higher chance of gaining acceptance and, quotes, fitting in during those awkward preteen and teen years. So do yourself a favor, do your child a favor. Start them on a strict regimen of sodas and other sugary carbonated beverages right now for a lifetime of guaranteed happiness. Oh, you didn't do that? Okay. So it's not surprising to me that the most evolved creature here is carrying a big slurp or big gulp or whatever you call it. The fourth guideline says eat more of a variety of vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and legumes, and these are on your menu. Unfortunately, we fail as a nation to do what the CDC recommends. The CDC recommends that we eat 3 or more servings of vegetables a day and 2 or more servings of fruit. And you can see that about a third of American adults eat the fruit and about a quarter eat the vegetables. And you can see the states that rank highest, actually the District of Columbia, Vermont, Maine, Hawaii, and Massachusetts. So the Northeast and Hawaii, and the states that rank the last are the ones that look like the election map. And the saddest thing for the future of our country and nation and weight is that less than 10% of high school students eat the recommended 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day, and that's even counting French fries and ketchups as 2 servings of vegetables. So it's a big problem. And even the august journal Science appreciates that fruits and vegetables contribute to disease prevention. Not just cancer, but heart disease, diabetes, and others that are killers of us. So why are fruits and vegetables important? So antioxidants. So oxygen, you know, lives as 2 molecules that are linked together. That's what we breathe, that's how we live. But when those oxygen molecules separate, they create so-called free radicals or antioxidants, or free radicals or reactive oxygen species, which knock into our DNA, causing damage, leading to aging or cancer. Antioxidants take those free radicals out of circulation so they don't do damage. Turns out that animal products are not a very good source of antioxidants. Plants are a better source of antioxidants. So that's why fruits and vegetables, whole grains, nuts, etc. are good for us. Now, I know we don't have control here on whether or not the food that we eat is organic. But in general, organic is probably better, particularly with regards to produce, because it decreases the amount of herbicides, pesticides, and fertilizers that are in the food. These are chemicals that we don't necessarily need to have in our body. But even more interesting, a plant that's grown outdoors organically needs to fight to protect itself from other plants, birds and insects, and the sunshine. And the only way a plant knows how to protect itself is by making chemicals. Turns out those chemicals that the plant makes are the ones that benefit us. So if we're going to let food be our medicine and medicine be our food, organic is actually more potent than conventional. So what are my favorite plants? Foods. Vegetables, I like cruciferous. Flowers grow in the shape of a crucifix, hence cruciferous. So broccoli, cauliflower, and Brussels sprouts jump to mind, but there are also cruciferous roots and green leafies that are cruciferous. Cabbage, kale, collard greens, bok choy, arugula. These vegetables contain 2 chemicals that are really important. One is something called indole-3 carbinol or sulforaphane, which is so potent at reducing the risk of cancer that we're started to look at it as chemotherapy. I believe we can never have enough cruciferous vegetables, and it's this American thing that we eat fruit for breakfast and not vegetables. I actually eat broccoli, tofu, and rice for breakfast. My other breakfast is mochi, which is just pounded rice. I puff it up in the oven, put almond butter, and then a sweet potato on top of it. Because orange yellow vegetables are also good for you. I see a lot of people say, I eat a lot of vegetables, I eat salad. I don't think salad is that potent. It's mainly lettuce, cucumber, and celery, and those are all pretty much water with a little bit of vitamin C. But the real disease-fighting nutrients are in the cruciferous vegetables and the orange-yellow vegetables. The other thing that cruciferous vegetables have is a chemical called DIM, which changes estrogen from the type that fuels estrogen receptor-positive breast and endometrial uterine tumors to the type that doesn't. So again, very good to eat soy. To eat cruciferous vegetables. Soy is always controversial, especially now that there's so much genetically modified food. Soy also, people fear, is a plant estrogen, and it's going to make those female malignancies worse, breast and uterine cancer. But actually, the data suggests that soy decreases the risk of both breast and prostate cancer, and that women with diagnosed breast cancer actually have decreased risk of recurrence if they eat a whole soy food each day. So a whole soy food would be soybean, soy milk, tofu, tempeh, or miso, and not soy cheese, soy turkey, and soy hot dogs, because those are just heavily processed foods. So other sources of plant estrogens or phytoestrogens are also flax seeds, which are also high in omega-3 fatty acids. I know a lot of people like to take flaxseed oil as a supplement. Dr. Weil says to avoid the oil because it goes rancid very quickly. He prefers to get flax seeds and grind them and sprinkle them on your salads or your foods. Season with ginger, garlic, onions, and turmeric. Turmeric is the yellow-orange spice that gives the color to Indian curries. And we're looking at the population of India, which is huge, 1 billion people. And they have very low rates of both dementia and cancer. And people have been trying to figure out why that is, and they've sort of honed down on turmeric because it's so widely used in the Indian diet. And looking at the chemicals in turmeric, there's a very potent anti-inflammatory there called curcumin, which is not the same as cumin, but it's a very potent anti-inflammatory that seems to also have some cancer risk-reducing chemicals as well. For beverage green tea, and I'm going to give you a little more information about that, and I was able to get green tea in the dining room for lunch. I drink 5 cups of green tea each morning. Now, one of the issues about the whole association between diet and cancer is that there are so many different results in the literature that seem to contradict each other or are even internally contradictory, and that makes people less willing to say that this is real science. But this is a huge study looking at 200,000 men and women, 45 to 75 years old, in Hawaii and California, who were followed for 7 years and looked at the development of colorectal cancer. And after 7 years, there are about 2,000 cases of colorectal cancer. And what they found was that, and they had 5 different ethnic groups because it was California and Hawaii, so a lot of diversity. For men, high levels of fruits and vegetables decreased the risk of colorectal cancer by 25%. However, for women, no risk reduction was seen related to the amount of fruits and vegetables consumed. So why would that be different for men and women? I'm asking it rhetorically. We don't know the answer, but it's these sorts of findings that make people scratch their head and say, well, does this make sense at all? the greater benefit here was for colon cancer and not for rectal cancer, and they claim that intake of grains had no effect in either sex. And remember, we've learned that high grains are good for fiber, for decreasing the risk. So it's these sort of findings that seem contradictory that make people wonder about, we can't do a placebo-controlled trial. We can't say this half of the room is going to eat broccoli and tofu for the next 30 years, and this half is going to eat what? Placebo, broccoli, and tofu? Many people think tofu tastes like placebo already. So, we can't do those experiments, so we have to rely on these epidemiologic studies. And we do some animal studies too, but I don't necessarily think that what you find in animals always translates into people. But green tea, amazing in animals, can protect many different types of malignancy. And in a large study of women in Iowa, tea intake was associated with a lower incidence of cancer of the digestive tract. And in China, men who drink green tea have half the risk of developing the very common cancer of the esophagus and stomach that's seen widely in Asia, as well as prostate cancer. So tea, by the way, theoretically or most correctly, is the name of the beverage brewed from the Chinese camellia flower, or leaves, the Camellia sinensis. And it's graded on how oxidized the leaf is before the beverage is brewed. So white, green, oolong, black, and pu'er. And the only two that have the cancer-fighting chemicals are the so-called white and green teas. Again, I try to drink 5 cups every day, but I do want to point out that this study shows us that it's not just one food, it's the diet. So you can't just single out one nutrient and say this is it. It's the combination. So this study was a study that looked at mushrooms, consumption of mushrooms and green tea in China in women with breast cancer. And they had 1,000 women with breast cancer and 1,000 controls, and they looked at their consumption of both fresh, i.e. white button, and dried mushrooms, shiitake. And they found that women who ate the mushrooms had about a 40 to 50% decrease in their risk of recurrence of their breast cancer, but women who ate mushrooms and also drank green tea had an 80 to 90% decrease in their risk. So again, these food components work together synergistically so that 1 + 1 = 5 and not 2. So it's the whole diet, not just a single component. And while I'm talking about white button mushrooms, all mushrooms must be cooked. White button mushrooms contain a cancer-causing compound. So slicing white buttons and throwing them in a salad is a no. All mushrooms must be cooked. So that, number 1, we can digest them, and number 2, white buttons, their brown cousins, the crimini, and their giant cousins, the portobello, in this agaricus family, all have a cancer-causing compound, and they must be cooked. I know for many of you, you've been eating raw white button mushrooms for many years, and you're still here to tell it. So, but the best idea is to cook all your mushrooms. This species, agaricus, may have aromatase inhibitor activity, so a good thing for women with breast cancer. I think that mushrooms, particularly the Asian shiitake, maitake, and enoki, have immune building and anti-cancer activity, and they're very good to eat. Now let me go back to turmeric. There it is, that's the color. You've all seen those Indian dishes that are that color. In and of itself, I don't think turmeric has much taste. It's very earthy, sort of like dirt. It's the other spices that give curry its traditional flavors, the fenugreek, cumin, and coriander. But it's the turmeric that gives the curry its color. And it does have incredible properties. It's a potent antioxidant, it's a very good anti-inflammatory. It's what I take for my arthritis, turmeric, and it works. I don't like taking aspirin because it makes me bleed, and those non-steroidals increase those little purple spots that we get on our arms too much in me. So I take turmeric and it works very well for me. But again, it does seem to also decrease the risk of a number of cancers. The first I heard of turmeric was at the American Society of Clinical Oncology, which is our conventional oncology meeting. Investigators at Ohio State have a mouse model of colon cancer. So the mouse is genetically programmed to develop colon cancer. And if they fed these mice a turmeric-enriched diet, not only did they not develop colon cancer, but they survived longer than the control group. And largely that's because turmeric doesn't get absorbed from the gastrointestinal tract, so it makes it all the way down to the colon where it can act on the mucosa to prevent cancers. Well, how does that work then for my arthritis if it's not getting absorbed? Well, they make some turmeric preparations that are more easily or readily absorbed. And if you take turmeric with black pepper, or a particular compound in black pepper called piperine, it increases the systemic absorption. Now, I often don't recommend doing that for people that take a lot of prescription drugs, because black pepper or piperine also increases the absorption of prescription medications. And I found that out the hard way, because when I first started taking my black pepper and turmeric for my arthritis, I woke up every night with a headache for the first 3 nights. And as an oncologist, I said, oh my God, I have a brain tumor. But it turned out I only take 2 prescription medicines, and they're both aimed at my prostate. And what it was doing was increasing the absorption of the one I take at night, so I don't have to get up and pee so many times. But that lowered my blood pressure to the point where I was getting symptomatic headaches. So if you take a lot of prescription drugs, I'm not recommending turmeric with black pepper. Guideline number 5 says limit consumption of red meats, beef, pork, and lamb, and avoid, which is a very big word, processed meats. That's bacon, ham, salami, bologna, hot dogs, anything you put on a pizza. And the reason why is demonstrated on this curve, which is a little bit old, but it shows the link or the relationship between daily intake of meat and colon cancer incidence of women. And you can see it's linear, that the more meat that's taken per day, the higher the risk of colon cancer. In this particular slide, the USA and New Zealand were the highest. That has been changed now to Japan and the Czech Republic because of changes in dietary habits, because of globalization. So how can people really eat that much meat? Well, think about it. Some of those Americans living in those states, they're in the middle where they eat bacon and eggs for breakfast, cheeseburger and fries for lunch, and steak and potatoes for dinner. That's a lot of animal protein, a lot of red meat, and that's really not good for you. How could anything coming from this lovely bucolic animal be not good for us? Well, that's how our meat comes, really, and the color that's missing? Green, right. So, and what is that white powder in the middle of the road? I don't know, but it's in your beef and milk. So, the big problem is that we feed animals that we domesticate for food, foods that they can't digest. Omega-6 fatty acids are important. They've gotten the black hat in this whole discussion and people think they're bad. But if you cut yourself, you want your platelets to aggregate, and you want to get red, hot, tender, and swollen because that's healing. That's what omega-6 promote. Omega-3 fatty acids, which are wearing the white hat, are anti-inflammatory and they break up clots. So the diet in the old days, or in the last century, had a ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 of 2 to 1. It's now felt, again, because of changes in the way we raise our animals for food, that the average American diet has a ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 of about 15 to 1. This is a slide from my friend David Servan-Schreiber, who was French, so he spelled pork differently. But what the slide is trying to show you is the change in our food chain. over the past 40 years of the last century. You can see that an egg used to have an omega-6 to omega-3 ratio of 2 to 1, and now it's 20 to 1. In fact, poultry and eggs are the most inflammation-promoting foods out there, not only because of the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, but because they're very rich in arachidonic acid, which is the chemical precursors of prostaglandins, the mediators of inflammation. So poultry really should be organic, and eggs should be organic omega-3 eggs. But again, that's if you can control it. If you can't control it, it's still okay to eat, better for you than red meat. Personally, I prefer the deep cold water fish, salmon, black cod, albacore tuna, herring, mackerel, and sardines. Those are richest in the omega-3 fatty acids, which are anti-inflammatory, also a little antidepressant, and in general good for the brain. So this is a study in men with prostate cancer. They took 48 men at UCLA who were going to have their prostate cancers removed surgically. And they randomized them to 2 different diets. The standard American diet, or a diet that had much lower fat, 15% of calories from fat, and that was supplemented with 5 grams of fish oil. And they wanted to see, at the end of the day, all the food prior to surgery was prepared and delivered by chefs at UCLA. And they wanted to see if this had an impact. Unfortunately, they chose as the primary endpoint that they wanted to see if it was different in the 2 groups, levels of insulin-like growth factor 1. And at the end of the study, there were no effects seen on levels of insulin-like growth factor 1. However, the men who had the low-fat omega-3 supplemented diet had lower omega-6 to omega-3 ratios in both their blood and their prostates. They had smaller prostates, both the benign and the malignant parts, and their prostate cancer cells were not dividing as rapidly as the control group. Also, when they took blood from those men and mixed it with prostate cancer cells in the test tube, it suppressed division of those cells more than blood from the men who had the standard diet. So I think omega-3 supplements are a good thing. Andrew Weil, in his book Spontaneous Happiness, talks about how to treat depression without antidepressants, and reports that he takes 4 grams, or took 4 grams a day of omega-3 fatty acids for his depression episodes. Now, I only take 2 grams a day, and I've heard in Ayurveda, the medicine of India, that omega-3 fatty acids lubricate the bowel. So I've never really been depressed, but I decided, let me see what it's like to take 4 grams of omega-3 a day. And I will tell you, I had that bowel lubrication effect. So I know that for some of us, regularity is nice, and I will tell you that if you increase your omega-3 supplements, you can become quite regular, to say the least. So, another little tip there. So, it is not just the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio in red meat that makes it problematic. Red meat, as you know, has a lot of iron. If you're not iron deficient, you don't need excess or supplemental iron, in fact, because iron feeds cancer cells. So that's one thing. Nitrates are present in processed meats, and they are carcinogenic. And another thing, in this country, we like to barbecue or burn flesh, and that creates heterocyclic amines, which are also carcinogenic. I'll have the half-pound, what does it say? Bacon, double deluxe bacon steer burger, please. You want chemotherapy with that? That's about right. So another fat that we need to think about is going to be discussed right now. So this is a study that the NIH and the AARP did in 500,000 people, and they were looking to see what caused increased incidence of pancreatic cancer. And they found over the course of a 6-year study, pancreatic risk was directly related to the intake of saturated fat, monounsaturated fat, and the strongest associations for saturated fat were from animal sources. Specifically, red meat increased the risk of pancreatic cancer 27%, and dairy products about 20%. So now I'm going to knock dairy? Okay, how can we knock dairy with the lovely Got Milk commercials? And dairy does provide us with a lot of important nutrients. However, there is no other animal species that drinks another species' milk. But no other species drives a car or goes to college, so that's not a very good argument. But no species drinks milk after they've been weaned. And actually, by the age of 3 or 4, we and all mammals lose the ability to digest the sugars and the proteins in dairy. We make a big deal about fat, low fat, no fat, 2%. It's not the fat. If you want a dairy product, butter is probably one of the best because it's mainly fat. We talk about lactose intolerance as if it's a disease or a disorder, when in fact it's the norm. The ability to digest lactose is a genetic mutation on the 2nd chromosome found mainly in Scandinavians who needed to digest reindeer milk in times of freeze. Otherwise, the rest of us are all pretty much lactose intolerant. And we don't know until we stop. And many people then say, well, what about yogurt? So yogurt or kefir, the sugars and the proteins have been altered by the bacteria, so they're probably more digestible. So if you need a dairy product, butter or yogurt or kefir, as long as they're not artificially colored, artificially flavored with added sugar, because sugar is the #1 no. Now this just shows you that Asians are basically 100% lactose intolerant. And again, people don't know until they stop. And I tell my patients, why do baby animals drink milk? And it's to grow big. And when adults drink another animal species milk, as adults, it makes you grow big. Yeah. So if you don't drink dairy, or if you don't consume dairy, that's a very quick way to lose weight if you need to do that. So my standard recommendations to my patients as well as my friends is to increase plant-based foods. Now I don't believe that we need to be vegetarian or vegan or raw. There's no culture that has veganism as their diet, where they absolutely eat no animal products, that survive. And you become deficient in a number of things if you're totally vegan. There are Seventh-day Adventists who are vegetarians who do have lower rates of cancer, diabetes, and heart disease. I personally do believe that we need a little bit of animal fat and animal protein. Not as much as people say in the paleo diet, where they eat a heck of a lot of fat and protein. But I think people need to increase plant-based foods, whole grains. I didn't talk too much about grains. I mentioned I ate broccoli, tofu, and rice for breakfast. Brown rice is better than white rice. If you like white rice, jasmine and basmati are better than sushi rice, Uncle Ben's, or regular Chinese rice. Millet and quinoa are also good grains, and I saw quinoa on the menu. Bread should be whole grain, not whole wheat, because whole wheat is just heavily processed, unbleached white flours. So for fruits, I like heavily pigmented. The berries, currently going out of season, they can be frozen though. Frozen berries only lose 10% of their nutritional value, in contrast to frozen vegetables, which lose over 50%. But the berries need to be organic, because they are like sponges for toxins. Vegetables, as I mentioned, cruciferous and orange yellow are my favorites. Decrease animal fats. Eliminate dairy, red, and processed meats. Personally, I eat animals only once a day at dinner, and the only red meat that I eat is lamb. I don't think pork and beef are particularly clean, but I will eat lamb on Sunday. Most of the rest of the week I eat either organic poultry, chicken. We use ground turkey for turkey tacos, turkey burgers, and I eat a lot of salmon, black cod. Decrease refined carbohydrates, sugar, white flour, white rice. Season, as I said, with ginger, garlic, onions, and turmeric. And for beverages, think about Christmas. Red and green. So green tea, and if you drink alcohol, and the guideline number 6, by the way, says if consumed at all, limit alcohol to 2 a day for men and 1 a day for women. Which to me seems very dichotomous. 2 a day, if at all. I couldn't drink, I can't do that. So anyway, so if you're drinking alcohol, red wine would be the best beverage. So in conclusion, the doctor of the future will give no medicine, but will interest his patients in the care of the human body, in diet, and in the cause and prevention of disease. Thomas Edison, a few years ago. And even before he said it, Hippocrates said, let your food be your medicine, and your medicine be your food. So bon appetit. I hope this was useful.
Thank you, Dr.